Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Kirk Cousins and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today we're talking about my Week 12 waiver wire targets for the 2020 fantasy football season. On today's episode, of course, we're going to be talking about all things waiver wire related as we talk about some waiver wire targets at the running back, wide receiver, tight end, quarterback, and defensive positions going into Week 12. Now, of course, we're going to be talking about players that had incredible breakout performances in Week 11, but we don't want players that are just going to be able to produce for a couple weeks. We want players that can have longevity for the entirety of the season going into the fantasy football playoffs from weeks 14 through 16. So we'll talk about players, their upcoming schedules, their own percentage, and why I think you should potentially be picking them up, not only based off the performances they had just this past weekend, but going forward and their potential. Now, before we begin, I want to thank you guys for your incredible support. Helping us get to 34,000 subscribers is not, a small thing, and I cannot thank you guys enough for continuing to support the channel, coming along, liking the videos, sharing the videos with your friends, family, etc., and also joining me and supporting me, whether it's on Patreon, Discord, or on Sunday mornings. It's really just been incredible, this journey. I'm extremely thankful for you guys. Again, one thing I wanted to mention, this upcoming Thursday, there are 3 Thanksgiving games. I will be streaming 8 a.m. in the morning. So for those of you who are interested, Kick Off with Kirk, we will be doing that Thursday morning. We will be releasing our running back video, our tight end video tomorrow. Wednesday will be wide receivers and quarterbacks, just to kind of get everything out as fast as I possibly can for you guys this week, so that you can prepare for the Thursday games. And then, of course, we'll once again have hidden gems on Friday, and then we'll talk about, Kick Off with Kirk on Sunday morning, 8 a.m. to 10 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. So we'll be good there, okay? Hopefully all is set. Appreciate you guys supporting the channel. Again, everything that is related to me down in the description of the video, whether it's the Discord, the Patreon, Twitter, all of that. Timestamps are down below for those of you who are looking for a specific player. Outside of that, make sure you subscribe to the channel, of course. Helping us get to 35K would be absolutely fantastic. And liking the channel, or liking the video specifically, would be great. And I really do appreciate it. Okay, so let's start talking about some waiver wire pickups at the running back position for Week 12. Starting off with the first player that I wanted to mention, J.K. Dobbins. Now, here's the thing. I know many of you already have J.K. Dobbins in your league, either on your bench or someone else has him. Currently, he's only owned in 63% of Yahoo fantasy leagues. And the reason I mentioned him is not because of the fact that, sure, he had a singular great performance, but as of the last couple weeks, he's gotten more and more touches and more opportunity within the Baltimore Ravens offense. And perhaps the performance just from this past Sunday against the Tennessee Titans may be the shift of the entire backfield going into the future. Now, of course, J.K. Dobbins had a total of 17 touches, 15 on the ground that led to 70 yards and a rushing touchdown, 2 targets, 2 receptions, and 15 receiving yards for 17.5 half PPR fantasy points. Overall, great. This upcoming week, they take on the Pittsburgh Steelers. And the last time J.K. Dobbins took on the Steelers, he had 121 all-purpose yards against them. And it was just a couple weeks back. So now that I'm talking about what he's produced as of late and what his potential is in this upcoming matchup, I look at it and I think to myself, okay, there is a very good chance that J.K. Dobbins, who is just this past Sunday, played 63% of the offensive snaps. And as of the last, couple weeks, since week 8, he has led the backfield in terms of offensive total snaps because he is the receiving guy, with Mark Ingram still being a little banged up and Gus Edwards not being reliable on third downs. It just seems to me that J.K. Dobbins is beginning to get more and more opportunity in this backfield. And as of just this past Sunday, the fact that he touched the ball 17 total times, while Gus Edwards only touched it 3 times and Mark Ingram only touched it twice. I mean, a 17-5 split, you'll take that any given Sunday. So hopefully, as we progress, as the matchups begin to get easier for this team, especially from weeks 13 through 16, J.K. Dobbins can truly be a breakout performer. And I think, again, if he is available in your league, only owned in 63% of Yahoo leagues right now, could be potentially picked up and played in the upcoming future. So we mentioned J.K. Dobbins, and we move on to our number 2, Wayne Gallman. Now, Wayne Gallman did not play this past week because the New York Giants were on a bye week. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention Wayne Gallman is because though he has been the starting running back of this team based on the fact that Devontae Freeman went down with an injury, he has still gotten more and more consistent touches as the weeks have progressed. Just talking about rushing attempts, out of the last 4 games he's played, 10, 12, 14, 18. It is progressively getting higher and higher. And the fact of the matter is, he is scoring touchdowns and getting ample opportunity in the red zone. He has scored 5 touchdowns in the last 4 games he has played, and he has had 6 total red zone rushing attempts from inside the 5-yard line, which has always led to a touchdown. That in itself kind of just helps me think that there's a very good chance that Wayne Gallman going into the future, I know Devontae Freeman is still on the injured reserve, won't be coming back until not this upcoming week, potentially the following week. And even then, he may be slow to return and may not be able to get as many touches. Now, the question remains, what is his outlook potentially going forward? I like the upcoming matchups. I like the Cincinnati matchup this upcoming week specifically for the New York Giants. I think their upcoming schedule, though it gets a little bit tougher down the line, I think the next couple games are easier and will help Wayne Gallman continue his fantasy success. I mean, as of the last, I think weeks 7 through 10, Wayne Gallman was the number 3 overall fantasy back in a half PPR scoring format. So again, as of late, he has been a beyond viable running back and has been completely consistent. Now, obviously, he's only getting 53% of the offensive snaps in his last 4 games. He's only getting 58% of the running back touches out of this backfield. So those numbers could potentially increase over time. But with his current workload, he has still found himself a very viable fantasy option. That's why I wanted to mention him. Again, he's only owned in 54% of leagues, less than a guy like J.K. Dobbins. Can definitely be picked up and played this upcoming week, and that's why we mentioned him. Number 3 is Carlos Hyde. Now, I don't know what exactly the timeline on Chris Carson is. I'm assuming Chris Carson will come back, but if Chris Carson is not to return, Carlos Hyde, who's only owned in 46% of Yahoo leagues at this moment in time, had himself a fantastic Thursday night game. 14 total rushing attempts for 79 yards, 1 rushing touchdown, 2 receptions on 3 targets, 16 receiving yards, and 16.5 half PPR fantasy points. This upcoming week, they will take on the Philadelphia Eagles on Monday Night Football. And the question remains, what exactly can we anticipate if, in fact, Chris Carson plays? If Chris Carson plays, then he's going to be the lone back in this backfield, and you can go ahead and forget about Carlos Hyde. That's just the fact of the matter. That's how this backfield functions. But if Carlos Hyde is to be the starting running back once again, just this past Thursday against the Arizona Cardinals, a defense that really hasn't given up much on the ground to opposing running backs, still got torched by Carlos Hyde. He had played 70% of the offensive snaps, had 16 total touches in comparison to DJ Dallas, and another running back having a total of 9 total touches. So again, there was a bit of a split there, but even then he delivered on his total opportunity. And this upcoming week, again, I still expect the Philadelphia defense, who, yes, they did shut down Kareem Hunt specifically, but they could not stop Nick Chubb. I think Carlos Hyde could have himself a pretty good week, again, if he is the starter and Chris Carson does not return. Moving on to number 4, Salvon Ahmed. We've mentioned him multiple times as of the last week and a half now. He's only owned in 64% of fantasy leagues. And though he's owned more than any of the running backs that I'm going to talk about today, the question is, what can we anticipate from him going forward? Again, Myles Gaskin could be returning as of this upcoming week or potentially in the future. I just wanted to go ahead and mention Salvon Ahmed because, again, if Myles Gaskin is to come back and potentially be slow to return, or in fact has a complication in returning from his injury, again, it's an MCL sprain, the question is going to be, where does Salvon Ahmed potentially fit in this backfield? He's playing 71% of the offensive snaps as of the last 2 weeks. Of course, we've seen him get 20 rushing attempts the week prior against the Chargers, and then just this past week had himself 12 rushing attempts for 43 yards, and then had himself 6 targets, 5 receptions for 31 receiving yards. Of course, 3 of those receptions came from Ryan Fitzpatrick, who came into the game late. We know that Ryan Fitzpatrick loves to dump off the ball to the running back position in this backfield. That's what gave Myles Gaskin so much of his value earlier in the season. But again, the question, as of right now, they're playing against the New York Jets. Regardless of whether Myles Gaskin comes back, I think this matchup is so one-sided in the direction of helping the Miami Dolphins get back on track and getting back on the winning column, that, of course, Salvon Ahmed is a viable option. He had 17 of the total running back touches. I think the only other running backs that touched the ball, Matt Breida and Patrick Laird, had a total of 3 touches on Sunday. So this is totally his backfield as of right now. Again, the New York Jets matchup should be fantastic for him, and I think going forward should be a pretty good play. All right, we have ourselves our number 5. Frank Gore. Now, I know the running back position is pretty thin, but Frank Gore had himself a fantastic week. 15 total rushing attempts for 61 rushing yards, had himself his first rushing touchdown of the season, 2 targets, 2 receptions for 10 yards, and 14.1 fantasy points. This upcoming week, he takes on the Miami Dolphins. Again, this is Adam Gase and Frank Gore having a little bit of a revenge game back against Miami. Both of them were a part of the organization just a couple years back. As of right now, Frank Gore only owned in 10% of leagues. He played 58% of the snaps, and even though LaMichael Pirine fell into the end zone early, he did deal with an injury, and it did force Frank Gore to get more and more usage in the game. Frank Gore had 17 total touches, while the rest of the running backs in this Jets backfield, whether it was Ty Johnson and or LaMichael Pirine, only had 12 touches. So he is taking command of majority of the touches like he has all season long, and potentially that could continue this upcoming week against the Miami Dolphins. Again, I think the Miami Dolphins, they got pretty much torched by Melvin Gordon and Phillip Lindsay. Their biggest struggle is stopping the run. And that has been an obvious thing all season long. Their secondary with Byron Jones and Xavier Howard have definitely been great. But again, I think there's a potential that you might be able to play good old faithful Frank Gore and find some consistency there. James White is our last running back option for this upcoming week. Only owned in 40% of leagues because James White has not been himself this year. Besides the injury and the off the field unfortunate matters with his family, James White hasn't been able to find really much consistency in this New England Patriots backfield. And prior to this past week, in week 11, of course, Rex Burkhead seemed to be the receiving back of this team going forward. Now, obviously, all of that was flipped on its head. James White came in, had himself 5 rushing attempts for 19 yards, an almost 4 yard per carry average. That's fine there. But his biggest contributions, as we typically know, is going to be in the passing game. 9 total targets, 6 receptions, 64 receiving yards, and 11.5 fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format. Of course, in a full PPR, he is dynamic and can take over as a flex in the coming weeks. But the question is, are we going to continue to see this kind of usage? He played 57% of the offensive snaps, which was the most that he had played this season, by about 3 or 4% in comparison to earlier this season, I think back in week 3. So again, there is a potential that James White could get more and more touches. As of right now, just this past weekend, again, with 6 receptions and 5 rushing attempts, 11 total touches, he equaled the same amount of touches that Damien Harris got in a matchup. Of course, that Damien Harris was kind of torching on the ground, but of course, the matchup got out of hand. They had to pass the ball in the second half because Houston mounted a lead, and it led to James White getting more and more opportunity. This upcoming week, they take on the Arizona Cardinals. I think, of course, the Arizona Cardinals, they've got one of the more powerful offenses in the National Football League. If Kyler Murray's healthy and back on track, they should be able to score, forcing Cam Newton to have to go ahead and pass the ball in the second half. James White could find some value this upcoming week and potentially going forward. Again, James White, one of the better receiving PPR backs in the National Football League. I'm excited to see that he's back, but he was just completely random and didn't expect that to be what exactly transpired this past week with Rex Burkhead kind of fading. All right, we move on to the wide receiver position as we talk about our top 9 wide receiver prospects for this upcoming week in waiver wire targets. So we talk about Michael Pittman Jr. as our number 1, the rookie wide receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. Had himself another great game. Of course, he's coming off of 2 back-to-back performances, the one against the Tennessee Titans in which he surpassed over 100 receiving yards. He'll have the privilege of taking on the Tennessee Titans once again this upcoming week. So again, that should be a great one with Phillip Rivers coming off of a hot hand, 3 passing touchdowns, and a great game against the Green Bay Packers secondary. That is an exciting prospect to see for Michael Pittman Jr., only owned in 44% of fantasy leagues at this moment in time. So besides that, this past Sunday, 3 targets, 3 receptions, 66 yards and a receiving touchdown, had a 40-yard touchdown early in the game, kind of made his entire day. Then after that, kind of faded a little bit because the team obviously wants to target the tight end position and wants to run the ball as consistently as they've had. He played 80% of the offensive snaps. That's the most amongst all Indianapolis wide receivers. And as we continue, he's going to be on the field for a majority of the time and get majority of the touches. So again, I'm excited about Michael Pittman Jr.'s potential going forward. This upcoming week against Tennessee should be good to go. Speaking of the Tennessee Titans, we go ahead and move on to number 2, where we have Corey Davis. Now, Corey Davis, again, playing against the Indianapolis Colts this week. He himself has had pretty good performances. On Thursday Night Football against the Indianapolis Colts a couple weeks back, he had himself a pretty good performance, and he was the only lone wide receiver that was actually producing on a consistent basis. He once again followed up that performance just this past Sunday against the Baltimore Ravens, another great secondary, and had himself a great game. 5 catches on 7 targets for 113 receiving yards and 13.8 fantasy points. So again, as of right now, Corey Davis only owned in 51% of fantasy leagues. I know he has been he disappeared a couple weeks back. About 3 weeks ago, he had a 0-point performance against Chicago in which he had 0 catches. And though that was unfortunate, he has still been one of the more consistent wide receivers in the National Football League. I think, again, as a wide receiver 3 with upside on a consistent basis, I find that Corey Davis is a viable option. And going forward, especially if you go and look at the upcoming schedule for the Tennessee Titans, from weeks 13 through 16, it is extremely favorable for the offense as a whole. I think all of their major pieces, whether it's Tannehill, A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, of course, and Corey Davis should be able to succeed with sprinkled of Jonnu Smith in the offense. But as of right now, I think Corey Davis has a lot of upside, and that is why he's our number 2 at the wide receiver position. Number 3 is Curtis Samuel. So here's the thing about Curtis Samuel in my eyes. Though he had a dud performance last week, perhaps that was just purely that. It was a dud performance, and maybe it's not the consistency that and the norm for Curtis Samuel going forward. In 4 out of the last 5 weeks, he's put up 10 plus fantasy points and a half PPR. In fact, since week 7, he's the number 5 overall wide receiver in fantasy. Just this past week with a backup quarterback, PJ Walker under center, with Teddy Bridgewater out, of course, with the knee injury, had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 70 yards and a touchdown, 17.4 fantasy points. Now the question remains, if in fact Teddy Bridgewater is going to, potentially miss more games this season, is that going to benefit Curtis Samuel? I think, of course, if Curtis Samuel is going to play just as many offensive snaps as Robbie Anderson. He's only owned in 50% of leagues. I think going forward, based on their schedule, playing against Minnesota this upcoming week, they've given up, I think, 2 receiving touchdowns per game to opposing wide receivers this season on average. It's a fantastic matchup. PJ Walker has proven that he can get the job done, whether it was with giving DJ more value through the passing game, even without a touchdown, and with Curtis Samuel. I think there's a lot of potential there. I like Curtis Samuel this upcoming week and going forward. Moving on to our number 4, we have ourselves Sterling Shepard coming off of the bye week. Now, I know, again, Sterling Shepard may have been dropped. He's only owned in 45% of leagues because of this bye week. He may have been dropped off, but the way that I see it, Sterling Shepard has been pretty productive and gotten a lot of opportunity as of the last 4 games he's played since he came off the injured reserve. In the last 4 games, he has had 32 total targets. That's 8 targets per game on average. In comparison to other wide receivers in the National Football League, I think that is a fantastic target per game average. Now, the question remains, what could we potentially expect from this upcoming week and going forward? Like I mentioned earlier with Wayne Gallman, I really do like the New York Giants schedule. I'm just going to read it out for you this upcoming week and going forward. They play against the Cincinnati Bengals, which again should be great. Without Joe Burrow, that offense is going to struggle, giving more opportunity to Daniel Jones in their offense. They play against the Seattle Seahawks the week following. That's great for fantasy. The Cardinals, that's great for fantasy. The Browns, that's great for fantasy. And unfortunately, in week 16, the championship week, they play against the Baltimore Ravens, but perhaps you won't need Sterling Shepard by then, but maybe he can go ahead and produce for you for the next 4 weeks as they play against teams that are giving up a lot of points to opposing wide receivers and quarterbacks as of thus far this season in a half PPR scoring format. So Sterling Shepard, who has played majority of the offensive snaps because of Darian Slayton's injuries as of late, and of course his inconsistencies, I think Sterling Shepard could be a fantastic wide receiver 3 option going forward, and again, could be available in your league to pick up. We have number 5, Nelson Agholor. Now, as I mentioned, Nelson Agholor, in the same vein of the fact that he had a fantastic game on Sunday Night Football against the Kansas City Chiefs. 9 targets, 6 receptions, 88 yards, and a touchdown, 17.8 fantasy points. We've seen Nelson Agholor do this all season long, but the issue is that he is very inconsistent. He is an every other week kind of guy, and every other week he is scoring a touchdown and getting over 50 receiving yards, and that is fantastic for his fantasy upside, but if we have to guess which week it's going to be done, that is a problem. Now, honestly, this upcoming week, they play against Atlanta. Atlanta's pretty good in terms of stopping the run. Maybe not against Taysom Hill, but perhaps against other running backs in specific, they've been pretty solid. So the question is, this upcoming week, as the Las Vegas Raiders take on the Atlanta Falcons, will they have to throw the ball? Sure, absolutely. I think Derek Carr is going to have to air it out, whether it is to Darren Waller, who is going to have a great week against one of the easiest matchups at the tight end position. But of course, Nelson Agholor has truly proven to be the number 1 wide receiver of this team based on targets, productivity, and consistency of play. Only owned in 20% of leagues. I think he could be a viable option this week. But again, be careful because he has been inconsistent all season long and is an every other week kind of guy. We have Cole Beasley as our number 6 coming off the bye week. I think Cole Beasley, even though he himself has been inconsistent as of late, having 2 performances of only 5 targets total and then another 2 performances of 25 targets total, Cole Beasley has kind of proven that even with this inconsistency, he has played at a very high level in comparison to last year as well. He's currently averaging 10.97 fantasy points per game, and I think if you're in need of a player that can easily just hop in as a wide receiver 3 flex option in a PPR half PPR scoring format, Cole Beasley does present a lot of value. This upcoming week, they do take on the Los Angeles Chargers. I think that matchup could be a very good back and forth matchup as the Los Angeles Chargers are not only scoring upwards of 30 points a game, but they're giving upwards of 30 points a game. Almost lost to the Jets, for goodness sake. They only won by 6 points there. So again, I think there is a very good opportunity for Cole Beasley, Josh Allen to mount a pretty good lead in this game and be able to throw back and forth against the defense that, again, they just lost Desmond King as they traded him away prior to the deadline. That was their all-pro slot corner. And if, in fact, Cole Beasley can feast with John Brown being a little iffy in the coming weeks, we could see some value there. Cole Beasley only in 52% of leagues. I think he's probably available in yours. We have Jalen Reagor as our number 7. Jalen Reagor is more and more as the weeks progress, solidifying himself as the number 2 or potentially even number 1 wide receiver of the Philadelphia Eagles. He played 93% of the snaps yesterday in a rain game and had pretty much the only presence as of a wide receiver on that team. 5 total targets for 4 receptions and 52 receiving yards, 7.2 fantasy points, only 28% of leagues. I think Travis Fulgham, as of the last 2 weeks, if I'm not mistaken, has had 12 targets and 2 receptions. Travis Fulgham has completely disappeared in this offense. And of course, the offense itself, because of Carson Wentz and his inconsistencies, has disappeared primarily. Now, the question that I'm going to go ahead and pose is, even though they play against the Seattle Seahawks, is there a potential that Carson Wentz could disappear and Jalen Reagor could be a play that maybe fizzles out? Yes, I think that there's a possibility of that. But I want to go ahead and invest in players that could potentially flourish as the upcoming weeks progress. And I think, of course, Jalen Reagor is one of those guys in an offense that, of course, is throwing the ball in the top 5 in the league, not only because they're losing games, but because their offensive mentality with Doug Peterson has been to pass the ball majority of the time. So as of right now, I'm very comfortable picking up Jalen Reagor. I think Greg Ward is going to eventually fizzle out. Alshon Jeffrey hasn't made a presence. Deshaun Jackson's not returning to do anything in terms of damage to this offense. Travis Fulgham's pretty much working himself out of a job in terms of his catch rate. So Jalen Reagor could be the best option in this offense going forward in the passing game, obviously outside of the tight ends. We have Breshard Perriman as our number 8. Now, Breshard Perriman in the last 2 weeks has scored, well, I think in the last 2 games specifically, has scored 3 receiving touchdowns for the New York Jets with Joe Flacco. I think Joe Flacco is probably going to be the starter the rest of the season, and that definitely bodes well for Breshard Perriman. He played 98% of the snaps against the Los Angeles Chargers yesterday, in which he had 2 catches for 54 yards and a touchdown. Of course, the game prior against the New England Patriots had himself 2 receiving touchdowns in a big game against, of course, a pretty solid secondary to say the very least. But as of right now, Breshard Perriman only owned in 11% of fantasy leagues. I know owning any sort of Jet property, whether it is Frank Gore or Breshard Perriman, is definitely something that is tough to swallow. But this upcoming week, they play against the Miami Dolphins. They're going to be throwing the entire time. I know they'll be running the ball pretty consistently, but if Breshard Perriman and Joe Flacco are going to find themselves a little bit of a chemistry as the weeks progress, I'm not afraid of potentially investing in it. We've seen Breshard Perriman be a solid wide receiver, especially with Jameis Winston in the fantasy football playoffs of last season as a guy that was a top 10 wide receiver because of his association in the offense, consistently throwing and getting opportunity. If he can get that opportunity with Joe Flacco going forward, could be of great value. We have number 9, Damiere Byrd. Of the wide receivers of the New England Patriots, it was an interesting stat that a good friend of mine told. Damiere Byrd did not catch a ball last week, which was week 10. In fact, the only wide receiver to catch a ball in week 10 against the Baltimore Ravens, where the New England Patriots played on Sunday Night Football, the only person to catch the ball at the wide receiver position was Jakobi Meyers. Now, we thought to ourselves, Jakobi Meyers could be the only wide receiver that has value, especially with N'Keal Harry just being very inconsistent. But this offense was forced to throw the ball, and Jakobi Meyers was definitely shut down this past Sunday. Damiere Byrd stepped up, got himself his opportunity. 7 targets, 6 receptions, 132 receiving yards, and a receiving touchdown. 23.3 fantasy points. One of the top wide receiver plays of the week, coming out of absolutely nowhere. Now they play against the Arizona Cardinals. I think that's a pretty good matchup for them. Of course, because of the fact that Damiere Byrd is only owned in 2% of leagues, you don't have to take the risk on him. You can go ahead and watch him from afar, keep him on your watch list. And as the weeks have progressed, maybe if in fact he gets more and more targets and opportunity in this offense, you can go and invest in him. We know this is a run-first team, but when a run-first team has to go ahead and throw the ball, how do they react? Of course, Cam Newton has already proven that he is not afraid of throwing the ball for upwards of 365 yards like he did on Sunday, and going forward could be of value. So we leave Damiere Byrd as our last wide receiver option. We move on to the tight end position. Our top 6 tight end options. Again, the tight end position is very thin. A lot of these players are probably already owned in your league, but we'll start off with a player that is only owned in 21% of leagues. Dalton Schultz. We mentioned him this past week. He was my number 12 overall tight end on Sunday. The whole thing about Dalton Schultz isn't a matter of, he had a good matchup against the Minnesota Vikings, who have given up some touchdowns to opposing tight ends, even though Jimmy Graham couldn't take advantage of it. He had himself 6 targets, 4 receptions, 25 yards, and a touchdown for 10.5 fantasy points. And my entire thing about Dalton Schultz isn't that, hey, he had a good matchup, but rather that this Cowboys offense could be turning things around with Andy Dalton coming back, and this entire mentality of Mike McCarthy's team just completely switching a dime. I mean, they're still in the playoff hunt. They could continue to compete every single week, and I think Andy Dalton, who has loved to throw to the tight end position all of his entire career, especially with Tyler Eifert as of late in Cincinnati, I think it's not a bad option. They play against Washington this week. They give up a fair share of points to opposing tight ends. I don't mind Dalton Schultz going forward. Robert Tonyan, as of right now, I know it's Tonyan. I like to say Tonyan. It's just easier for my brain to function. But Robert Tonyan, 46% of the leagues own Robert Tonyan as of right now. 5 for 5 this Sunday for 44 yards and a touchdown against the Indianapolis Colts. They give up the fewest points to opposing tight ends. So that myth is pretty much busted. If you have a tight end that's relevant, they will produce against Indianapolis. You don't have to worry about that. They play against Chicago this upcoming week. I think Chicago's given up their fair share of points to opposing tight ends. So I think there's a very good chance that Robert Tonyan could have himself a good week here. Probably already owned in your league as the tight end position is very thin, or he has been circulated as people get a performance out of him that they're pretty dissatisfied with, and then they drop him, and then the next week he pops off. You can go ahead and potentially pick him up this week against Chicago and find yourself in a pretty good matchup and finding yourself some points there. Austin Hooper's my number 3. The reason why I wanted to mention Austin Hooper is mainly because of their schedule upcoming. They play against Jacksonville this week. Then they play against Tennessee. That is great for the tight end position. Then they play against Baltimore in week 14, the first week of the fantasy playoffs. Even though I don't like that matchup specifically because Baltimore has dominated Cleveland in the past, especially week 1, there may be a shift of the tides, but week 15 and 16 of the fantasy football playoffs, playing against the New York Giants and the Jets, I think Austin Hooper could be of good value. Now, this past Sunday against the Philadelphia Eagles, 5 targets, 3 receptions, 33 yards, and Baker Mayfield threw a wide open touchdown to him 10 yards over his head out of the back of the end zone. Unbelievable in my eyes, but Baker Mayfield, you've seen his performances. He hasn't completed a passing touchdown in the last 3 weeks, so I don't really blame him. The weather's a problem there. They should be in Florida this week playing against Jacksonville. I think Austin Hooper gets back up on the horse and continues his consistency as the season progresses. Jordan Reed's my number 4 coming off the bye week. Again, like we've mentioned before, Nick Mullins loves to throw to the tight end position. He was one of the main reasons why George Kittle broke the record for the most receiving yards in a season by a single tight end in 2018, where Nick Mullins was the starting quarterback there. Just the last time that we saw Jordan Reed had himself 6 total targets, 5 receptions, 62 yards, and 8.7 fantasy points. Plays against the Los Angeles Rams. We've seen it on a consistent basis for the last 3 seasons. George Kittle dominates against the Los Angeles Rams. It isn't just the fact that George Kittle dominates because of how much of a talent he is, but because the tight end position is specifically schemed in a way that they could take advantage of the matchup and specifically succeed against the Los Angeles Rams defense. So I think Jordan Reed, who will be the starting tight end of this team going forward, only owned in 50% of fantasy leagues, should be a great value pickup and play this week. We have Mike Gesicki as our number 5. Gesicki, again, this is another tight end thing that a lot of people complain about, but this is just how I pronounce it. Regardless, owned in 61% of leagues. As the weeks have progressed, the past 3 weeks, he is at over 40 receiving yards. I think a lot of that has to do with, of course, with Ryan Fitzpatrick coming in. If Ryan Fitzpatrick is the starter this week with an injury to Tua's ankle, maybe, in fact, we see more productivity out of him against the New York Jets. But again, he's a player I wanted to mention because he's pacing in the right direction. He's just got to find himself in the end zone with a touchdown. I think that's coming very soon. Richard Rodgers is the last tight end I wanted to mention. I know Zach Ertz is on the injured reserve designated to return list. He should be activated in the next 14 days, if I'm not mistaken. It's already been 7 days from when they already declared that. But he's only, Richard Rodgers is only owned in 3% of leagues, and he's still producing on a weekly basis for this offense. Just this past Sunday, 2 catches, 48 yards, and a touchdown. The week prior had himself 8 fantasy points. So he's been 10 points per week in the last 2 weeks. That's great. Plays against Seattle this upcoming week. If this offense cannot find value out of their wide receivers, they opt back to the tight end position where Carson Wentz finds himself more comfortable, of course, delivering the ball. But as of right now, Richard Rodgers, if of course we don't see the return of Zach Ertz and you are struggling to find a tight end, which I doubt because there isn't any bye weeks this upcoming week, Richard Rodgers is not a bad option. We move on to the quarterback position. We start off with the man of the hour. Taysom Hill has had himself a pretty good Sunday in week 11. Now, it was very apparent as soon as they came out that, okay, Taysom Hill needs to get a little bit of the, I wouldn't say the rust off, but more like he needs to get a little bit of the dust off as of being the starting quarterback of a team. Obviously, he was a starting quarterback back at BYU in his college days. But as of what we saw just from the performance, 18 of 23 passing for 233 passing yards, didn't have any passing touchdowns or interceptions, got the work done on the ground as I anticipated. 51 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns. Similar to what I talked about, he's going to be like Cam Newton in the fact that he is going to get majority of his value, whether it's on the ground and rushing yards or rushing touchdowns. In a 4-point per passing touchdown league, getting 6 points per touchdown because he is running it in is so much more valuable than you guys could potentially imagine. 2 rushing touchdowns in a 4-point per passing touchdown league. 2 rushing touchdowns is the value of 3 passing touchdowns. So again, he himself pretty much had a 3 passing touchdown game with 200 yards and 51 rushing yards. Fantastic performance against the defense that he gets to once again play in week 13. He plays against Denver this week. I think that defense is not very good. Taysom Hill only owned in 43% of leagues. If you played him as a flex or a tight end play this week on ESPN, congratulations, you must have won your week. But either way, Taysom Hill as a starting quarterback, he's gotten the nod from me. I'm ready to go ahead and invest in him very heavily going forward. And he's going to definitely be a part of the top 12 conversation every single week with his rushing ability in this offense. We have Derek Carr as our number 2. Derek Carr had a fantastic performance on Sunday Night Football, but we anticipated that because he has produced well in his career against the Kansas City Chiefs as of late. Going back a couple weeks back when they played against Kansas City and gave them their lone loss. To be honest, the fact that they were able to compete as well as they did this past Sunday, of course, Patrick Mahomes coming down late in the game, scoring a touchdown to Travis Kelce in a couple plays. That's just an unfortunate, matter. Derek Carr throwing a touchdown late. That's just him trying to force the ball downfield with less than a minute to go. It's unfortunate, but it is the reality of the situation. Had 23 for 31 passing, 275 yards, 3 passing touchdowns. This upcoming week, they take on Atlanta. He's only owned in 36% of leagues. And I think, of course, if you're in need of a quarterback, he could be a great option. For those of you who had Matt Ryan, Matt Stafford, they're not doing so hot, right? And Teddy Bridgewater, those are guys that have been players that you can rely upon. And as of late, can we really rely upon him? Maybe Derek Carr could be the opt and the rotate this upcoming week. Our next streaming option is Kirk Cousins as our number 3 quarterback. Kirk Cousins had himself a great game against the Dallas Cowboys secondary. Shouldn't be a surprise. Of course, Dallas has given up a lot of points to opposing quarterbacks and wide receivers this year. I had 314 passing yards on 22 of 30 passing. 3 passing touchdowns. Adam Thielen feasted. Justin Jefferson got work. Dalvin Cook got what he usually gets. Not the explosive game that we potentially anticipated, but either way, Kirk Cousins only owned in 42% of leagues, plays against the Carolina Panthers this week. I know Carolina gave up 0 points to the Detroit Lions, but I 100% believe that the Minnesota Vikings are a far more superior offense, and especially being able to start off by running the ball consistently against Carolina, it'll open up a lot in the play action game. Kirk Cousins should be a great play. We have Andy Dalton as our number 4. Andy Dalton had himself a great performance. 3 passing touchdowns, 203 passing yards, 22 for 32 passing. Yes, he threw an interception, but this upcoming week plays against the Washington football team. It is a revenge game of all revenge games. As we remember, Andy Dalton was knocked out of that game against the Washington football team. His offensive line didn't pick him up. His team did not stand up for him. And I can guarantee you, from what Mike McCarthy has done as of the last couple of weeks, that team's mentality has flipped. They're going to be the aggressors in this contest, and I think this team is going to be playing for Andy Dalton and try to get him and this offense on the right track. I think, of course, the strides that they took, whether it was on the ground with Ezekiel Elliott having his first 100-yard rushing game this past Sunday, CeeDee Lamb and Amari Cooper finding relevance, of course, with Dalton Schultz. This offense is going in the right direction. Andy Dalton only owned in 9% of leagues. Not a bad option going forward. Matthew Stafford. I bring up his name mainly because I don't think that performance that he had is going to define his season. He's only owned in 62% of the leagues. He plays against the Houston Texans this upcoming this upcoming Thursday. I think there's a potential that Kenny Golladay plays. Danny Amendola is back. Marvin Jones, DeAndre Swift. If they get their full offensive threats back, playing against Houston, who's given up the most rushing yards around the National Football League, and as a secondary haven't been great. Cam Newton's thrown for 365 against you. Damiere Byrd's coming out of nowhere and destroying. There is a chance that Matthew Stafford could be a relevant fantasy play, get upwards of 2 passing touchdowns this upcoming week. That's why we mentioned him. The last quarterback option I wanted to mention is Daniel Jones, because we've talked about a couple, New York Giants today. Cincinnati, Seattle, Arizona, Cleveland. Those are the next 4 contests for the New York Giants. All potential games that not only can he produce well in, but this team can very well compete in. So Daniel Jones, only owned in 28% of leagues, who has been, in a 6-point per passing touchdown format, sure, he's gotten a little bit more value, but, just looking at his rushing totals, Daniel Jones has kind of found himself some consistency on the ground. The fact that he can run the option is just insane. But the read option itself, it's just going to continue to lend more and more points to him with his rushing ability. I'm excited to see what he's, potentially going to do in the coming weeks, but I think Daniel Jones, great option. We follow up and finish off today's episode with 6 defenses that you could potentially target, and we'll talk about their upcoming schedules as we progress. Starting off, our number 1 of last week and our number 1 continuing is the New Orleans Saints. I don't know why I went and bailed on them on Sunday yesterday. I was consistent with starting them yesterday. Then a couple creeping thoughts came into my mind with Marshawn Lattimore missing, that maybe in fact the secondary would fall apart and the defense would fall apart, but it seems to me that they are just unstoppable as of late. In the next 3 games, they play against the Denver Broncos, the Atlanta Falcons, and the Philadelphia Eagles. We know the tendencies of course, Drew Lock to throw interceptions. Matt Ryan cannot play without Julio Jones in the lineup. And Carson Wentz has looked like a flaming garbage can this year. And the last time Carson Wentz has played against the New Orleans Saints, he had the worst game of his National Football League career, in which he put up 3 fantasy points and threw 4 interceptions. So the New Orleans Saints, who have put up 16, 14, and 16 fantasy points in the last 3 weeks, have pretty good special teams, should be great going forward. We mentioned the Cleveland Browns on our hidden gems. Again, the Cleveland Browns didn't just have one good matchup. They have 3 good matchups going forward in the next 5 weeks, playing against the Jacksonville Jaguars this upcoming week and the New York Giants and the New York Jets in weeks 15 and 16. For those of you who are interested, could potentially roster an extra defense. They're only owned in 59% of leagues. The Cleveland Browns defense, not a bad option. The Miami Dolphins need to be brought up, even though they did not have a great defensive performance in terms of overall points. Looking at their upcoming schedule, they take on the New York Giants and the Cincinnati Bengals. If you go ahead and potentially have an opportunity to pick them up and play them, I think that in the next 2 weeks could be great. 10-plus point plays for you as a defense, so we mentioned them. We have the Green Bay Packers playing against the Chicago Bears, the Philadelphia Eagles, Detroit Lions, and Carolina Panthers. Now, I think the Chicago Bears matchup should be easy. Again, last year, just go look at the output of which the Green Bay defense got after Mitchell Trubisky. I think they'll once again do that, but against Nick Foles, if he's even healthy. I don't even know who the starting quarterback is going to be for that team coming off the bye week. Nick Foles is injured. Trubisky's injured. They've got a third string guy that just looks awful. So against Chicago, should be a great play. Philadelphia, again, Carson Wentz not playing great. I think that could be a good option. Matthew Stafford's kind of been fumbling as of late in terms of his overall productivity. And then if, in fact, the Carolina Panthers, I mean, honestly, I think the Green Bay Packers, if they can go ahead and turn it around, clamp up a little bit, could be a pretty good option. The New York Giants are a good option themselves, playing against Cincinnati this upcoming week. And then, obviously, I don't really want to play them against Seattle, but I think this week, by itself, the New York Giants could easily be a top 5 defense. So they're a great, fantastic streaming option. And then the Buffalo Bills, looking at their upcoming schedule, they play against the San Francisco 49ers, and then they play against the Denver Broncos in the upcoming weeks. That isn't this upcoming week exactly, but I think in the upcoming weeks. I know that the Los Angeles Chargers is the matchup this week. I don't really want to play their defense against the Chargers, as they've been pretty good in terms of scoring. So in a couple weeks, Denver, San Francisco, those are 2 games for the Buffalo Bills, that should be taken advantage of. All right, those are my waiver wire targets for week 12. I know that was a long episode. I had to talk about a lot of stuff. I really do appreciate you guys staying along, supporting the channel. Make sure you subscribe down below, click the like button. And until tomorrow, we'll be talking about running backs and tight ends. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Enjoy the Monday Night Football game, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.